Welcome back to Natural 2, our TTRPG talk show and podcast where we discuss whatever is currently bouncing around in our noggins. I am Nathan, my host as always is James, and today we are discussing something that's rather near and dear to my heart, and probably something that a lot of DMs have some grappling implications with, and it is trying not to get caught up in the having your fun correlate with your character's success. And we'll get a bit more into the depths of that, but I guess, general broad strokes of it is you don't always have to be succeeding or knocking it out of the park or dealing the most amount of damage to have fun while playing your tabletop role-playing game. But that's my little sales pitch. What do you got, James?
Yeah, this is a challenging topic to sort of wrangle with in my mind. Um, because as much as I do think of myself as a role player, I I I think there's two ways you can look at that, right? You're either just super interested in what's the most interesting story, and uh we were talking about Seth from our group and how willing he is to just see his character dragged through the gauntlet
Mm-hmm.
by the scruff of his neck. And I definitely personally skew more towards the other sort of side of that coin, which is, yeah, I'm role playing. I'm this person, and I don't want them to get dragged through the gauntlet any more than I personally want to get dragged through the gauntlet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also on top of thinking of it as a game in the sense that you are trying to be successful or not, which I probably also lean that way with it. But I think that there's something in this conversation for everyone in that um, failing gracefully really brings a lot of flavor to the game. And it is at least as important as good sportsmanship in any other sort of game, if not more so,
Mm-hmm.
because um, of what it can do to the overall narrative that's unfolding in your campaign.
I think the first thing I want to kind of combat, which I imagine is like the gut reaction of most people, or at least probably most players, is I don't want this to come across as like, oh, you're not smiling and giggling while your character's being decapitated. How dare you? Have fun with it. Like, there is a nuance to this conversation, and it really, I think the key to it is you don't have to enjoy every little setback, and you probably shouldn't enjoy every little setback because that kind of defeats the purpose of being a setback. But there is, I guess, fun that you're leaving on the table. There is enjoyment or at least immersion or engagement that you are letting kind of slip through your fingers because while you don't have to laugh at everything and make everything some bombastic moment, you can't it's not you can't have a good story. It is difficult to have a gripping story when it's all highs. It's like a roller coaster with no drop. It's like if I succeeded everything and face no hurdle and conquer everything easily, like where's the interesting part, right? Like in any sort of story that you could point to is like one of the best. There's the second act where the hero's down, he's struggling, he's relying on the small bit of strength he still has. And if you don't have those moments, you can't have the triumphant highs. And that is, I think, is the best way to kind of open the door is you gotta acknowledge both sides of the coin to make it all feel connected and real. And you don't have to treat every bad thing as like wonder bread. It's like just absolutely astounding how great this is. But you should engage with it. I guess it's probably the better word than enjoying it. And why I think that in a broader spectrum, the community kind of, I don't want to say has a problem with this, but sees it in a negative light is a lot of terminology in TTRPGs is, oh, I succeed or I fail or I hit or I miss. It's not, oh, I do my damage or I, twirl in some ridiculous way and not strike my target, right? Like there's definitely a negative connotation to the other side of that coin. And that I think makes everyone kind of be like, I'm punishing myself because I rolled a 3 where you could potentially turn that into something interesting.
I think as I was listening, I was thinking of it like sweet and bitter, or sweet and salty,
Hmm.
uh, as opposed to success and fail, because you want both of them in the long run. You don't only want sweet. You will get tired of it. Um, so I think this is a good place to say that one of the ways that I think you can make this easier or make this more likely to help the state of play at your table, is something that I can't remember if we've talked about it in a previous video yet or not. But
Hmm.
if we haven't, either way, it doesn't matter. Something that I have talked to you about doing is, if I'm going to attempt something, usually persuasion, I roll it first,
Hmm.
and with approval,
Yeah.
either explicit or implied, because we've been playing together long enough now that there's implied approval.
Hmm.
Um, but roll it first, see the result, and then um, describe what I do or describe
Hmm.
what happened. Because I think one of the things that hurts the tone at the table, or has a high likelihood of hurting the tone at the table, is somebody lays down a hot fire, right?
Hmm.
Their character gives an impassioned speech that player's been sitting on since the beginning of the campaign, and now they're face
Hmm.
to face with their rival and they are laying it down. And then the DM says, "All right, roll intimidation," and they roll a 2.
Hmm.
And now the DM has now the player is pissed off, and the
Yep.
DM has to figure out what is that going to look like now. And it takes a talented DM to avoid just falling back on, like, well, you were doing great, and then your pants fell down in the middle of your
Yeah.
speech.
Yeah.
Like,
No,
it's
someone
hard.
vomited on his shoes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would not say that I have mastered it. Uh, it's only come up a limited number of times because we started that right before the end of Asmiliath Adventures, and now
Hmm.
we're only approaching the third session of Talor Tales, so it'll come up more. But I find that really helpful, or at least I believe it to be really
Hmm.
helpful in um, keeping the tone,
Accurate.
keep yeah, or making sure things fit,
Hmm.
and that it doesn't get into this Looney Tunes territory. And it also makes it like you see the result first, so you're not getting that letdown of, man, I just really put my best self out there.
Hmm.
And um you can work with it. You don't have to have this Monty Python moment. You can make it appropriate. And I'm starting to ramble. I think I made my point.
Hmm. I want to try and attack, I think, the biggest distance between a DM and a player as far as this topic is concerned. Because a lot of how I kind of think of these things is like I'm speaking to an audience of players. 'Cause I think most people in the D&D space are players, and there's far fewer DMs. But anyway, I think the biggest gap is that DMs are kind of inherently built to not be attached to their characters. And like obviously there are some who get like this obsessive little like DMPC and they're never going to let go and they kind of use that as a player fill in, but for the most part, we have to be prepared for our villains to be defeated and humiliated and dragged through town, our dragons to be conquered by some fucking insane contraption the players have thought of. Like, we have to always be ready to be like, yeah, I am gonna get humiliated in the worst kind of way. And the moments that we get to slap it to the players is few and far between. And so we're kind of built to enjoy the negative or work with the negative. Because sometimes when it goes well in my domain, I feel guilty and I'm like, oh God, hold on, they're winning. What do I do now? Like,
The mindset of the DM does benefit from a kind of professional distance
mm-hmm,
from all of the DM's characters.
mm-hmm,
don't get too attached because maybe you lay down the hot fire and then the player rolls a crit smite
Yeah.
and that encounter's over.
So I don't want the advice to be like disconnect from your character because that's horrible advice. But I think there is a good middle ground where you shouldn't come into every session expecting to be Superman, trudging through everything, succeeding at everything, everything going your way. You should, every time you throw that dice, have an idea in your mind of what success and what failure looks like. And not to give you guys a little bit of meta game, but if I'm DMing a game, and I imagine this applies to most DMs, and my player rolls like a 5 or something, and I'm sitting there kind of like, okay, what does this mean? If they then quickly offer up like, oh, as I was going for my swing, I trip and my footwork kind of fumbles a little bit, and I scrape the wall with my sword, it's like, that's what happened. So you might have a little bit of puppeteering going on if you can quickly kind of engage with that failure, help the DM along that route. The old man DMs, they need assistance. But yeah, I think that's like a thing that you could really embody, and it might lead you in or down the rabbit hole of there's cool things you can do with misses. There's interesting scenarios you can do with misses. And I'm going to let you talk because I'm rambling, but my next thing is going to be why this whole topic kind of arose, at least in my universe.
It's maybe helpful as a player to think of any of your misses or failures or bitter moments as setting you up for that crescendo, setting you up
Mm-hmm.
for the eventual uh conquest. Um and in that light, think about like Die Hard, right? John McClane gets absolutely wrecked in that movie. Um pulling it out by the skin of his teeth. And that's why everybody remembers it. That's why everybody knows it. Um that's why people who were, you know, wouldn't be born for another like 10 or 15 years when that movie first came out have heard of it
Mm-hmm.
because uh everybody loves that. Everybody loves that story. Um
The underdog,
and-
the impossible odds, the stacked
yeah,
against him. Yeah.
or the dog that has his day,
Mm-hmm.
that's getting absolutely just kicked around and struggling, and then at the end of the movie throws the bad guy out of the 20th story window,
Mm-hmm.
and we can all enjoy that sweetness. We can all just feel fulfilled.
So the reason that I brought this up this week, and I'm a little bit obsessed, and I will put that forward right off the get-go. I've been getting into Iron Sworn, which is an RPG that's or TTRPG, that's very mechanics light and narrative heavy, which is basically my perfect universe. Love narrative over mechanics, but that's probably mostly me. But it's designed mostly to be played solo or co-op without either of you being a GM. You kind of are your own GM for the majority of the time. And so you are faced constantly every time you do a roll, and the rolls can dictate things from like moment to moment to days of travel or, a large event like trying to like gather information in the town. So you do the role, and it's very much the way that I've described it to others is like you are actively taking the role as like the seer that's throwing the bones on the ground, and you're reading the symbols and like what it means and like how it all fits together. Because the game, if you go off the random charts that it provides, could give you something like the major themes are doom, greed, and revenge or something. And you just take these three words and try and formulate what that means, how it all works in, what kind of story could progress off of this. And I was kind of struggling to get far in the game when I first picked it up. I ran like 2 or 3 sessions or campaigns or adventures in it, and I kept finding myself like out of supplies, injured, broken, like, just losing it and just not being able to claw myself back. And while that is kind of some of the point of the game, is there are going to be adventures that succeed and some that fail and whatnot. I watched a video that really helped clarify a lot of things for me because I'm not a veteran at doing solo TTRPGs. And the best piece of advice is not every setback has to be like a mechanical negative. And not every hurdle has to be a negative. It could simply be a hurdle that you now have to alter your course around or change your approach or something, right? And so what I started doing is when I got the negative outcomes, instead of taking off one health or losing my equipment or, unless something was specifically called for, I started trying to think of what would be interesting. What would make this scene more interesting or provide more opportunities or be a weird twist and that I started having an unhealthy amount of fun is probably the best way to describe it because it was just my imagination just running rampant with these little injections of direction, and it was so fun. It was so fun. And so I'm already kind of theory crafting of how to bring some of these aspects into D&D because it's the main game that I play with other people. And I think the lesson that I want to try and impart, and I've already tried to put to practice a little bit, is try and highlight some of the negatives or some of the setbacks and try and open new doors with those setbacks versus just giving them a flat failure. Like if someone's trying to cross a ravine with a spike trap at the bottom and they fail, but it's a minor fail. They don't roll like a nat 1 or something. Maybe they don't fall into the trap, but they fall and they're clinging to the rope. And now, the tension is raised and there's new opportunities that other party members could help them or they have another chance to claw their way back up. If you give them more options instead of just slamming them with 6 points of damage, it just creates a more dynamic and interesting event. And you could also ask for the players' feedback. Again, same situation. You're like, oh, as you're halfway across, you feel yourself begin to slip and you know that you're going down. What do you do? The response might be, oh, I try and grab it, and you end up with what you had. Or the response might be, I try and leap the last 10 feet. I just Hail Mary it, see if I can make it. And you just roll with it. So that's my little pitch. That's the whole reason I brought this up, what I'm kind of obsessed over and I want to really dig deep into because I think it's so much potential that it's just wasted. So, yeah.
So you're saying that as the DM is the arbiter
Mm-hmm.
of success and failure and all of the degrees within those,
Mm-hmm.
to put it another way.
So if the advice is being given to DMs, I would say as long as the mechanics leave the wiggle room, try and come up with different, again, roadblocks, problems, complications, plot twists, or negatives, and try and vary it up. Try and have a larger range of that besides, you take damage or you get a level of exhaustion or whatever kind of straightforward, generic approaches that we're kind of used to. And if I was giving the advice to players, I would say try and be ready to engage with some sort of negative thing or offer up a alternative to having just a flat out negative failure to something because I think most DMs, and this again, I say most, would be willing if a player tried to kind of step forward a little bit and be like, I know I just botched that roll, but can I try and wiggle it a little bit in a certain direction? They would probably work with you, is my bet. So that's, I guess, my little, maybe potentially better phrased advice for either party.
Very interesting.
I'm going to get you to play Iron Sworn with me, and you're going to see the light, I promise.
Hell, we should make a video out of it.
I was thinking that it would be interesting to. I'm not an Iron Sworn expert, but I think I'm proficient with the rules at this point. It would be interesting seeing someone new to the game being led by someone who kind of knows what they're doing and seeing what happens because it's an interesting game. It's very engaging. When I say engaging, it's mainly me just staring at my keyboard for 20 minutes at a time trying to figure out what's going on, but it works for me. So
Let's play Iron Swarm coming soon to a
Mhm.
YouTube screen near you.
Mhm. But
Uh, if that would interest you, let us know in the comments
mhm.
and like and subscribe, and also anything else down there. Your thoughts about success, failure, the bittersweet symphony of a D&D campaign or a
Mhm.
tabletop campaign. It's more important than
Mhm.
ever to be inclusive of
Mhm.
all the systems that are out there and that are wonderful to play. And that's all that I've got. Until next time.
Have a good one.